Okay, so I want to show you just a little bit about doing research. A lot of this should be review for many of you. You've covered this in English 131 and some of your other classes. But nevertheless, I want to give you some pointers as you begin the work of uncovering relevant secondary sources for your writing. You're going to be asked in a little quiz coming up to find some secondary sources that will be related to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the novel that we're currently reading. Since that's going to be your task, I'm going to use a different test case. Imagine that I have been asked to write an essay on the nature of evil in Suzanne Collins' novel The Hunger Games. We'll be reading that a little bit later this summer. And I know that I need to find secondary sources for this. The question is, how do I go about doing that? Well, if you're like me, probably the first thing that I'm going to do is go to Google and type in evil in the Hunger Games to see what comes up. And there's nothing wrong with starting with Google. It gives us some interesting background information. But you know what you'll find out here pretty quickly is that a lot of these sources are not particularly reliable. This first one looks pretty interesting on the surface. Good versus evil, the Hunger Games analysis. What could be better? Let's click on this. And what you find out here is that this is simply a blog that someone has put together. And if you notice, we don't even know who that person is. It could be a high school student, could be a college professor. We just have no idea. And that really undermines the usefulness of this source. If we come back, we can see there are some other interesting ones here. I had to click on this and watch this. The Hunger Games, Evil Satanic Ritual Abuse. I watched about 2 minutes of that video, and basically what it says is that the Hunger Games is programming you so that when the Satanic Ritual army takes over the world, you will be ready to be taken advantage of. If you were to cite that in an academic paper as a secondary source, that's not going to be too great. So we want to see if there are ways to find better quality secondary sources. And as you should remember from many of your other core curriculum classes, if we go to the library's webpage, we can go to this link called Online Databases. You might be tempted to use PowerSearch, and that would be okay. PowerSearch is a general search engine that covers a lot of stuff. But we may do better if we get a little more specific. If we go to databases grouped by subject, you'll see that there are a group of databases under the heading English. And since The Hunger Games is a novel, that might be a good place to start. I happen to know that the MLA International Bibliography is one of the best search engines out there for articles written about literature. If you're working in a field and you don't really know, the best bet is to contact our librarians. They'll put you in touch with the right database to use. JSTOR would also be a good one. So I'm going to go into the MLA International Bibliography, and this opens up, and it's very much like Google, except that instead of searching everything on the internet, this is searching only decent quality academic journals and other types of publications. So we know that the results that are returned here are probably going to be more useful to us as secondary sources in an academic paper. So I'm going to type in evil, and I'm going to put in quotes here, Hunger Games. Just a couple of words about the search engines. When you put something in quotes, that says look for this phrase rather than those individual words. The word and, it may not even be necessary here. This is what's known as a Boolean operator. And what it says is look for the word evil, but also look for the phrase Hunger Games. Certain search engines, if we were just to do this, it would look for that whole phrase at once. And what you'll notice here is that we didn't find anything that has the word evil and the phrase the Hunger Games in it. The search engine, being a good, kind being, does say, okay, well, if we didn't find anything with all those terms, let's get rid of the quotation marks and see what we can find there. And there's some things here about the Hunger Games, and I've already scrolled through these. There is, you see here, the title of an article, Simulacra, Sacrifice, and Survival in the Hunger Games, Battle Royale and the Running Man. And it's an article in a book titled Of Bread, Blood, and the Hunger Games, Critical Essays on the Suzanne Collins Trilogy. That might actually have something worthwhile in it. Those ideas, sacrifice and survival, may have something to do with evil, so I would probably check that one and try to get a copy of that article. As we scroll through, there's just not a whole lot here that looks obviously really, really useful. However, I get this book again of Bread, Blood, and the Hunger Games, Critical Essays. That tells me I probably need to just order a copy of that through interlibrary loan if the LR library does not already have it. So it may be that because The Hunger Games is a relatively recent book, that scholars just haven't written a whole lot about it yet. But I still have to write about it. So one thing that we can do is to rethink the way that we're searching. If we think about The Hunger Games, we know that it is an example of young adult literature or children's literature. So what if we were to do evil and children's literature? And what you will find here is, now we're getting somewhere. As we scroll through, and I already looked at these a few minutes ago, a lot of these, again, not terribly useful. You've got to try to figure that out by looking at the titles. But now we get down here, a new algorithm in evil, children's literature in a post-Holocaust world. So this is talking about evil after the Holocaust, which was 1940s, in children's literature. It may not ever talk about the Hunger Games, but I bet I can take the ideas here and apply it to the Hunger Games. In fact, given that it was published in 2000, I feel quite certain that it does not mention the Hunger Games. Scrolling down further, Good and Evil in the works of Diana Wynne Jones and J.K. Rowling. Once again, probably not talking about the Hunger Games, but that idea of good and evil in children's literature we can probably use and apply. So the key things to take from this are use your academic databases. They're going to get you better quality sources than Google does, although you might start with Google. Second thing is, if you run into trouble finding relevant sources, rethink your search strategy. Instead of searching for the specific work, search for something like the category that that work might belong to. Children's literature, young adult literature, whatever. This is a process of trial and error, and it does take some time. So when you're asked to do research in the course, be sure to allow yourself enough time. And really, if you run into trouble, get in touch with me. I will be happy to work with you on finding relevant sources.